Hi everyone, it's Karen at Close to My Heart. Today we're going to be creating a single page layout that I'm excited about because it's something that I do in my house that's become a tradition. Before we get started though, I just want to remind you to like and subscribe to our channel and be sure to turn on those bell notifications so you don't miss any Close to My Heart videos. Let's talk about what I'm doing. I'm going to show you what I've brought here to the video studio to create with, and we'll get started. Okay, I brought a bunch of cardstock. You can see in lots of colors here, and some fun die cuts. I'm just going to see if I can maybe make this so you can see. There you go. They're kind of shiny, and there are lots of different shapes and things in those. The last several years here at Close to My Heart, we've had a special once a year called Cardstock Carnival, and that actually happens to be going on right now when I'm shooting this video. So I thought it would be fun to challenge myself to use only cardstock on this layout, and then these die cuts are also part of that special, but you can use any die cuts if you like what I'm doing today and want to kind of recreate it. If it's past the special, then of course you can just use whatever you want or cut things with your cutting machine, whatever. So I've got those, and I've got my cardstocks, and I've also got my photos, and I want to talk through my photos, what I'm going to do today, and why I've chosen these colors of cardstocks. So I'm going to take this over to the close-up camera actually. Let's take a look at the photos that I have. Something that I have done in our family that my kids love, especially my daughter and daughters-in-law, is I have created a 12 by 12 album of recipes, and they're special recipes that have maybe been handed down through my husband's family or mine, or that we've gotten from a close friend that we make all the time for certain things, or that have a special story behind them. This is a pasta chicken salad that our family loves. My daughter, who is now grown and has 4 kids of her own, did ballet her whole life. And this is her when she was Arabian in Nutcracker. And the reason these two photos connect, you might be wondering, why do you have a ballet photo and a food photo? Because each year for their ballet company, there was a fundraiser where we did a luncheon, and we always served this salad, and everyone loved it. In fact, only the people that got to work at that were supposed to have the recipe, and I was lucky enough to get the recipe, and my family loves it. So I wanted to scrapbook this, a single 12 by 12 page with the recipe, which I have already typed up and printed so that I'm ready to go with that. And the story, I have the story here. Here we go. The story here of where this recipe came from. So this was the beginning of what I did. Now, while I've got these here, I'm just going to start bringing in some of this cardstock so you can see why I chose the colors that I did. Of course, I chose some white daisy because I include white daisy in almost every layout that I do. It's great for matting photos, great for a base page, all kinds of things. And then as I was looking at my photos, of course, I've got a lot of pink here, and even some of the grapes in the salad are bringing in that pink, lots of different shades of pink. Then the bowl that I took a picture of the salad in has some kind of bright blue and some greens. And so as I looked at these and thought about colors that would coordinate nicely and bring in colors from these photos, I grabbed 3 different pinks, which you can see here. I thought all of those would work nicely with what I have. And then I brought in a couple of blues. I brought in Bluebird, which I thought looked like this, but I know I don't want to use it in large amounts because I think it will overpower everything that's happening there. But I also brought Lagoon because I liked the way it coordinated with those pinks that I had, and I feel like it's a good happy medium between that green and blue, and that it will look nice with what I do on my page. So I brought those, all of these cardstocks down to the video studio with me, and then I also drew myself a sketch. I love to start with a sketch. Sometimes I just draw it on a scratch piece of paper with a pencil, but I knew I had 2 3x4 photos today, and I also knew that I wanted to use cardstock, and I thought it would be fun to create my own piece of cardstock with strips that looks like a striped pattern paper. And so I thought if I put maybe some white daisy right here in the middle and on the outside, then these 2 strips down the sides could be cardstock, and then we'd have room for the recipe and the story and the title of the recipe here. I also thought if I'm creating a whole piece of cardstock, I may have enough left over to make a card, so I drew myself a little card sketch as well. I think it's a great way to start scrapbooking, and I would say 9 times out of 10 I do this. Every once in a while I'll just pull in what I've got and just start moving things around and gluing, but for me, this helps me waste a lot less paper because I kind of have a general idea of where I'm starting. So let me go over here where we're going to create. And I think what I'll do is take a white daisy piece of cardstock and my trimmer and just start cutting strips. So my thought is just to let strips fill that whole page. So I'll cut 3 or 4 of each color and maybe about a 3/4 inch width. And we'll just see what happens while I do that. So I've got tons of strips cut, in fact, way more than I probably need, but who knows? I do quite often, when I stamp something or cut something, save it for later if I don't use it. I just keep a little plastic bag with scraps of each of the colors in them in my studio, so maybe that's a little tip for you. And I'm going to start just by creating this paper full of stripes. And one thing that I find when I am creating a pattern, I don't like it to perfectly end at the top and perfectly end at the bottom. I kind of like it to look like it's more organic. So I'm just going to make sure my paper's nice and straight here on my Versamat. You can see there's measurements under there. That's going to help me get this nice and straight. I'm just going to put this first strip on only a 1/2 inch in. You can see I've just lined that right across at the 1/2 inch here. And I'm just going to pretend that that is the bottom of a set of stripes. And I think I'm going to kind of love the idea of showing the light and dark sides of our cardstock. Our cardstock has a true color on one side and a lighter shade of that color on the back side. Just going to leave a little strip in between there, a little bit of white, and then I used raspberry, and I think I'll do the light side of raspberry, and I think I'll keep the colors that are the same touching each other, and then as I switch to another color, I'll leave another about 8-inch space like I did there, so it'll feel like a uniform piece of cardstock. So I'm just going to continue to move through the paper page until I get that done. Okay, I've got all my cardstock glued on in stripes, and I'm loving the way that that piece of paper is looking. As you know, I overlapped a little on the top and the bottom, so I'm just going to turn my paper over and grab my scissors and cut off that excess. You could also do this with your paper trimmer, but I feel like when you look at the back and they're contrasting colors, it's a really easy cut with your scissors. And then we'll be ready to start creating, I think, now that I've got my paper created. There's so much you can do with cardstock, especially two-tone cardstock, like you see here. All right. Now I'm just going to put my sketch in to remind myself kind of what I had thought I would do. And this piece in the middle that we're going to use for the recipe and the title and everything, I have kind of thought white daisy made sense. So it could kind of be it wouldn't compete with the photos and what we decide to put there. So I'm just going to cut about a 6-inch strip, because when I printed my recipe, I think I printed about 6 inches wide. So I'm going to cut that down to 6 inches as well. I'm just going to see if I can center that so that it'll fall right in the middle. No, actually, maybe I'll go over here, and then maybe I can use this side to do some stamping or some accenting on. So 6 inches wide. And I'm not going to cut that down yet because I'm going to see how much space I want left at the bottom, because I think what I'd like to do, if I can fake it, is make it look like this is all one piece of paper. It probably will need to move down quite a bit. And we're going to need a title. I did grab an alphabet to do my title, and I stamped it ahead. This is a trick I thought I would teach you. You can see this is called URB chicken salad, not herb. I should have put little periods between those letters, but I quite often when I'm going to stamp a title or a word on a page, I will stamp it first on a little scratch piece of paper, kind of measure it so that I can see exactly how I want it to fall and where I want it to fall. So if I'm looking here, thinking about where my photos might go, that leaves me a little space here at the bottom of my page. Then I think we can make it look like that's all on one page. I can mark this. So what I did is once I'd stamped that, here, I'll bring this over where you can see it a little more close up. Once I stamped that, I measured how wide that was. It measured 4.5 inches wide. So then I found my center, which is 2 1/4. I stamped that URB chicken first, and then I knew I wanted the word salad underneath. URB stands for Utah Regional Ballet. And so then that helped me when I made that center line, know where I wanted the center of the second word. So you can kind of see how that works well for me and how I can use this to help me put things where I want on my page. So let's go back over here, and I'm just going to grab a pencil, put this title about where I want it to be. I'm going to mark myself a little center. And then I'm also going to grab a ruler and also draw myself some straight lines on here so that I can make sure that I have this title nice and straight. So I'm just going to line this up so that I've got my paper straight on my Versamat, and that way I can easily use my ruler to line it up on the sides and get a nice straight line. So I think probably want to come down to about right about there. There we go. I'm just going to draw myself a line. I'm going to just double check how tall these letters are. It looks like they're about a little less than 3/4 tall, so maybe I want to go maybe an inch or 7/8 down here and draw a second line so that I have a line to stamp my my title on. So I now have 2 horizontal lines and a center mark, so it'll be really easy for me to now look at this and just do that exact same thing again and know it's going to look good on my page instead of being concerned that maybe it won't come out quite right. It's worth taking an extra 5 minutes to do something like this, and quite often when it's something that is that I know I'll use over and over again, like a hello or whatever, I'll even throw that in my stamp envelope with my stamp set, and then I'll have it for later to be able to measure again. Okay, so I'm just going to move my cardstock out of the way, and I'm going to grab a Lagoon stamp pad because I feel like that's the color that's kind of the accent color and everything here, and I think that would be a fun one to use for the title. But I'm also going to use the foam piece that comes in the stamp set. And you can do alphabets several ways. We have stamp sets, stamp blocks that are long and skinny. I prefer to stamp mine one letter at a time. It gives me a little more control, and it lets me get my letters as close as I want them to be. So in my sample, the H was right in the middle. It kind of intersected the H. So I'm going to start with the H, and then we will move out on either side from that, and then we'll start below with the L right below the H and move out, and then we'll have a nicely centered title. So you can see how nicely that title turned out just by having that already stamped ahead of time on a piece of scratch paper. So I feel like that's a good start here, and I think I'm ready to trim off a little on the bottom here of my recipe. I'll add that to the bottom so that we kind of see what's happening here. And I can use it as what I'd like to do to accent on here. So my 2 photos, I'm trying to decide if I want to mat them. I'm just going to put this on here for a second so that I can see what is happening. You know, I think I might want to mat them in white. I love a white on white with maybe a little stenciling or sponging back behind, so maybe that's what I'll do. These are 3x4 photos. So let's just cut ourselves a couple of 3 1/4 by 4 1/4 inch mats. We'll add our photos to those, and then we'll be able to lay everything out that we want on this centerpiece. I find it saves me a lot of grief later to not commit to too many things and start gluing things down until I know for sure what I want. So my mat's a little sticky here. So I'm just going to continue to lay things on top, and I'm really liking the way everything's looking. I just need to take my eraser and erase my pencil marks now that I've got that all stamped and have given it a second to dry. And you may have noticed as I was stamping that I stamped a little above the line that I created for myself. It makes it a lot easier to erase if the ink's not right on top of that line. So I think what I'm going to do is just put a tiny little piece of adhesive behind so that I can use it as my guide and still pick it up and move it. There we go. I want that to cover the top of that line so that I can pretend that's one. We can do all kinds of pretending things in scrapbooking. Okay, I think what I want to do is do a little bit of ink blending back behind this to make these photos really pop. So I'm going to grab a blending brush and my ballerina pad, which is the lightest pink I've used here. And I think I just want to carefully add some color back behind, and maybe even behind my title. So when you use a blending brush and an ink pad, you never want to take it straight from the pad onto your paper. You want to daub it off just a little bit, and that helps you to keep from getting like the shape of that blending brush on your project. Another thing that I have found helps me a lot is to maybe start in the area that I think I'm going to be covering up a little bit, and then I have a little bit of a beginning and know that it's looking like I want it to look before I go too far. So I'm just using this ballerina ink, and a little ink goes a long way. So you don't want to get it too dark or it will overpower what it's behind. So you can see that I'm trying to keep it nice and light here. And let me just see how that's looking coming out from my photos. Can you see how that little bit of pink is already making such a difference? I do want it just slightly darker than that, so I'm going to continue to layer this ink. A lot of times people will think, oh, well, why keep layering when you could just put that fully loaded blending brush onto your paper? And the reason for that is you will get a blob or a blotch if you're not careful doing that. So I'm just going to let it go down a little bit here into the recipe, and even a little bit up here behind my title. Be careful because I hope that ink's dry. You can see right there, I actually brought my blending brush straight over here because I got in a hurry and wasn't paying attention. And so I'm going to want to put something right there so you can't see that little blob as much. Embellishments are always a great way to hide mistakes. So I'm getting my pink on here quite a bit like I want it to look. And something I love to do and do quite often on my pages is when I've done something like this, I'll take a little bit darker color and do a little bit of stenciling. So I think I'll try that here too while we're at it. I'm just going to take this darker pink, the raspberry, and I think I have some stencils sitting here somewhere hiding. There they are. I'm using actually some of our card front stencils. And I love this center one. I use it all the time. I'm not sure if I bring this over here, you might be able to see the pattern on it. It's maybe behind a cardstock. How about that? This package of stencils actually has 3 stencils in it, and they're made to cover a card front. This one has 3 stripes, and then there's 2 different stencils that come with it. And this center one is the one that I use more than anything, and I use it on scrapbook pages all the time, those little tiny dots. And I'm just gonna, I think, add that a little bit to some of that sponging and let that also peek out from behind my photos and around my recipe. So like I said, I'm using a raspberry pad this time. I can use the same brush because I'm just doing a darker pink. And again, I'm going to start in an area that I know isn't going to show yet so that I can see if I want it lighter, darker. That might be slightly darker than I want. So I'm just going to not even reload my brush as I come up where it's going to show a little more. I'm just holding it in place with my hand. You could certainly use some masking tape or something to keep it from moving, but I'm just holding it pretty securely there with my hand. And I'm going to let some come down here. You can tell I haven't even really reloaded my brush. I'm letting it be so subtle so that it's just going to look nice peeking out from everything. And I'll bring this over so you can see it a little more close up. You can see how it's just subtle and pretty, just going to be peeking out. Now I'm going to grab my photos and you can see what I mean. It goes a little bit lower. I'm really liking how it's looking. Isn't that pretty? It just brings the focus right there on those photos and lets the white matte pop just a little bit. I really love that. I think I'm about ready to commit to this and put it on my page. So the next thing I want to do is figure out how much of these stripes I need. And if I bring my sketch back in, I kind of thought it would be cute to have a small amount on one side and a larger amount on the other. So maybe I'll cut a 1-inch strip and I don't know, we're going to guess like a 1 and a 3 and see how that looks. And luckily I have lots made here. So if I decide I don't like that, then I can always cut some more. So I've got that nice 1-inch strip, and I think I'll do a 3-inch strip and see how those look on either side of that centerpiece. And I'll grab another white daisy because I think I'm going to plan on using white daisy as my base. I have the smaller one over on the right side in my little sketch, and let's see if in real life it looks just as good as I was hoping it would. I'm liking how this is coming together. And as I'm looking at my picture and at these, I want to bring in just a tiny bit of that bluebird. So there are a couple of ways I can do that. I can do that with some paper, but I don't want it to overpower what I'm doing. So I think I'm just going to cut like a 1/8-inch strip. I tend to do that a lot when I have a color that I just want to bring in a very small way. Maybe even the light color, the light side of bluebird. I'm just going to cut a 1/8-inch strip and see what that looks like coming down this side here where there's a little bit wider stripe. I'm liking how that's bringing that little bit of bluebird that's in the dish over here. Can you see how just 1/8 inch of piece of cardstock can make such a big difference? The other thing I think I might want to do, I brought a stamp set down knowing I was going to be doing this ballet recipe, and we have a ballet stamp that I love, and I think I'm going to maybe just stamp a couple pieces from here, maybe cut them out and see if there's ways that I can lay them on my page here as an accent. And something that I do quite often is I'll take the carrier sheet, or I'll even take a ballerina off the carrier sheet, a stamp I guess, and lay it where I want it to be. Like right here we have all this white around the edge of the recipe, and this girl, I think this girl is the one that's going to fit the best. And I also think that these cute little point shoes would be pretty, maybe hanging from my title or in the corner, probably right here, of one of my photos. So I'm just going to take some ink and stamp those. And I really don't want to bring any black into this page because I feel like the color is what is is so appealing about it. So I'm going to stamp, I think, in colors that are on this page. So I'm just going to grab some white cardstock and my foam. Maybe I'll try stamping that ballerina. I think I'm going to put that ballerina right here. Another tip for creating is to create triangles, and you can do that on your page, visual triangles with shapes or colors or whatever. I'm looking at this blue that we're using as just a tiny accent, and we've got 2 places that blue is. So what if she is blue? And that creates my visual triangle. And then maybe I'll do those ballet shoes in pink. So let's see how that looks. Some white cardstock, foam. And I'll start with ballerina and some bluebird ink. And when I have a larger stamp like this, I like to actually put it on the block and then sponge my ink onto her, because I feel like I have a little more control than if she goes off the edges. Although our stamp pads are raised, as you can see, which keeps you from getting an edge that's wiping off ink. This just makes it even more certain that you're going to be happy with what you do. So I'm going to stamp her in Bluebird. Another trick is to let your stamp sit on your paper for just a second, and that ink will absorb more into your paper, and it'll be a bolder stamped image than if you were to just wipe it right off or lift it right off. Then I've got a raspberry. Maybe I'll do those ballet shoes in this brighter pink. And I think I'll cut these out. It's so much easier to cut when I have them in their own small pieces. And then we can add them to our page. And I'll also just use these smaller pieces that I'm cutting to make sure I'm happy with how they are going to look on my page. So I'm going to bring that back in. As you can tell, things are sliding around a little bit, but that's fine with me. At least I can kind of make sure that I'm happy with where things are landing before I start to cut something off a little bit. So I'm thinking maybe right there and right here, and I think they look a little stark. I like the placement. I like this blue triangle, but I think I want to add just a little bit of color to these guys. So I'm going to grab some colored pencils. Colored pencils are such a fun way to add a really subtle amount of color to something. So I'll bring these over where you can see me color them close up. And I'm just turning my, I'm just using my Versamat here to color with, and I'll start with the ballet shoes, and I'm just using a bright pink pencil, but it's going to probably look a lot lighter. Now, when you shade with a colored pencil, you need to think about where the light's coming from and where it will be darker. I'm going to pretend my light is coming from this way. So the darkest parts of my shoes are going to be the parts that are furthest away from my light. So I'm going to start there. And a tip would be to take your pencil. You want it to not have a too pointy of a tip. You want it to have a flat edge, almost an angled flat edge. So just like scribble it on a piece of paper a little bit, and then you've created a nice angled tip and it's flat on your paper. Then if you follow the shape of what you're shading, and I'm barely pressing at all, I'm just giving it a tiny bit of color, then I can come back to the part that I want to be a little bit darker and use that flat side so you don't see more, pencil lines. And I'm just doing a little bit more color there, pressing just a little bit harder on the pencil and trying to continue to follow the shape of what I'm coloring. So you can see, hopefully, how cute that looks. I love that just tiny bit of color there. And I think I'll do the same thing over here. I want to see if this pink matches though. Let's just take a peek and see. It's a little bit purpley, so I'm going to grab one more of my colored pencils. This one's a little redder, I think. Yep. And I'm just going to add that on top, a little bit of that pink to tone down the purple in it. There we go. I would be willing to bet that's going to match my page a little better. So using 2 colors on top of each other, you can make your own custom colors. And yep, that looks much better. So I'm going to call that one good. And now I'm just going to bring in a blue to color my ballerina. And I think I'm just going to color her dress, maybe her shoes and her dress. And you can see how I'm just lightly using that angled tip of my pencil and then coming back in and doing just a little bit of shading. Same place with that flat edge. I'm just pushing a little harder, and then as I'm coming in so that it's gradual, I'm just putting less and less pressure so that it just gradually blends out into that shaded that we want. And I think on the skirt, I'm just going to turn this a little bit. On the skirt, I'm going to just do mostly the folds. Let's see how that looks. If I need to add more, I can. Because if there's folds in that little skirt, which is probably sheer, then that's where the color would show more, where it overlaps. And so that's why I'm just using the folds there, and maybe a little bit of the shoe here. And I'm just going to lightly go out from where those folds were so that it feels a little bit like it's fading. There we go. Okay, I don't know that I feel like I need much more. Let's just see how that looks on my page. There's adhesive on my mat, so I'm having fun getting it on and off. There we go. Oh, I like that so much better. Can you see this? What's happening here with this triangle? I love how that is bringing the page together and moving your eye through the story and the photos. And so I think I'm about ready to start putting all this together. So I'm just going to cut out these pieces I just stamped and colored. Okay, I'm looking at this and really liking the direction it's going, but I think something that I do a lot on my pages, almost every page if I'm being honest, is put color back behind. And I was looking at this, I'm thinking it might look nice with some color back behind, maybe the medium pink. The light side of the medium pink, I'm liking how that's looking. So I'm going to cut this page down just a little bit, maybe a ½ inch off of the page. There we go. All right, I'm ready to put this page down and add my stamped embellishments, and then maybe use some of these die cuts and a few things to embellish with. There we go. Okay, I'm liking how that's looking. I like that pink border. So I'm going to grab my two little stamped accents and add those, and then see what I can do with these die cuts. There's my visual triangle. And the point shoes hanging from the photo. Love that. All right, I'm going to grab the die cuts that I brought down. Bring those in and just play with some of these shapes and see if I can come up with anything I love. I love the flowers, and it makes sense to me with ballet, so I may poke out a few of these leaves and flowers and all the colors. And I'm also looking at my stamp set, and I'm going to just add this little sparkle stamp set and give that a few little stamps right there. I still have a little more space than I really want there. And you can see how I've let things overlap there so that it feels nice clustered together there. And I think I'm going to bring some leaves and flowers just right over here as well. I actually think there's one last little final touch I want to do. I think I want to add just a tiny bit of this around this. We cut this down to 11.5 by 11.5, so I'm going to take a piece of this Bluebird cardstock on the light side, I think, and do 11 and just maybe a little over more than an 1/8, bigger than that 11.5 by 11.5, and let's see how that looks. If I put that underneath there. I think so much of scrapbooking is trial and error. If you make something and don't love it, the first second you look at it, like right now, I just am looking at this thinking it just needs a little more definition behind it, don't be afraid to take it apart a little bit and try something else. It's just leaving a tiny little border around the edge. You can maybe even get the same look by sponging the edges of your page. But I didn't think of that, so we're doing cardstock. All right, I already love this better. I think it's defining the edge of that white daisy piece perfectly going on that piece of flamingo cardstock. You may not even notice it other than knowing that it pops a little bit more. I did bring a few gems down. Maybe we'll play and see how those look. And somewhere I think I have a piercing tool. You can use almost anything to lift the gems off, even your fingers, your scissors, your tweezers. I'm just going to use this because for me this is the one that I like the best. I'm just going to add some centers to my flowers, I think. I think that's turning out cute and making those flowers really kind of pop. These are just black and white dots. You could even use a light pink dot or almost anything just to give a little more interest to your page. I think that's pretty. I also brought some of these. These are just clear sparkles, and I think I might just add a few in there because I feel like this page feels kind of fancy, like a ballerina, right? So why not? Why not have a little bit of bling in here? I'm going to mix a little bit in with these. Maybe up here where I stamped that cute little sparkle stamp. And one more here. So as I'm finishing this page, I'm really liking it, and there's some things I should probably point out that I think are making me like it. First of all, that visual triangle of the blue, but I've also brought in just a little bit more blue. We've also created 3 accent areas that I think add a lot. And as I'm looking at this, I'm thinking I ought to use a little bit of white gel pen on this page. This little guy just feels really empty to me. I'm just going to write delish. There we go. And why not add a little bit of a border along this blue piece? To go into my family recipe album. I'm really happy with how that turned out, and I think it feels like a family heirloom. That was tons of fun. I hope you enjoyed it with me. I mentioned at the beginning of that video, I thought I would have enough of the stripes left over to maybe be able to create a card. So I did. So I'm just going to show you that as well. Let's take a look at this close up, and you can see both projects. Here's my layout. I think it turned out really nice. And now you can see some of those details close up. You can see how that stamping filled in those extra spaces. And I just took the leftover stripes and used the same stencils and colors and just created this cute little card from the sketch that I made too. So if you decide to try this technique of creating stripes, don't throw that extra paper away. You can use it for all kinds of other things. I think this turned out really nice.